Now in our 25th year, a quarter of a century of service to the worldwide amateur radio community, we are this week in Amateur Radio. Your all-amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. This is edition, number 1320, with a release and air date of Saturday, June 15, 2024. Please take the program to your air following the upcoming cue tone.
Now in our 25th year of service to the worldwide amateur radio community, we are this week in Amateur Radio, the premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1320 of This Week in Amateur Radio. ARRL 2024 Field Day is now just a week away. We will have last-minute advice. AMSAT announces that its mail Alias service will end on August 1, 2024. The Square Kilometre antenna array is under construction in a radio quiet zone, as satellite constellations above are shouting. Amateur Radio connects family members during a boating accident in Utah. The new Amateur Radio Extra Class question pool has been released. Yet another cyber attack. This one brings down the Society of Broadcast Engineers website. Germany's new N-Class license exams will be available at Ham Radio Friedrichshafen. South Africa takes its first steps to World Radio Conference 2027. There is a robust lineup of vendors and speakers at the upcoming 2024 Northeast Ham Exposition. Scanning software developer N5JMZ becomes a silent key. And a recent deadly cyclone in India causes a family reunion. We will have the story in this week's report. These headline stories will come to you in a moment, along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Anno Benchop, VK6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio will talk about long-wave radio. Our own amateur radio historian, Bill Continelli, W2XOY returns with another edition of the Ancient Amateur Archives. This week, Bill continues looking at amateur radio's fallen flags. With part 2 of the series, Bill looks at the legacy of Halicrafters. We will stop by and visit with Bill Saliers, AJ8B in the DX Corner, with all the latest news on DXpeditions, DX, upcoming radio sport contests, and more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air, right now. Reporting from our headquarters studio here in Albany, New York, where we are heading into a week run of 90-degree days, this is W2XBS.
And reporting this week from the ham shack of K2MST, inside the Museum of Science and Technology in downtown Syracuse, New York, I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
And reporting from our news bureau in Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, I'm Dave Wilson, WA2HOY.
And reporting from our news bureau just outside Albany, New York, in the Geek Cave studios, I'm Rich Lawrence, KB2MOB.
And recording from our news basement here in Scotia, New York, where I'm getting ready for Field Day next week, I'm Savo, K2SAV.
And reporting from our Troy, New York News Bureau, where this week the cottonwoods stopped shedding, I'm Eric, KD2RJX.
And reporting from our amateur radio outpost in the western Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where the mercury in the thermometer is coursing ever upward, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR.
And now, with this week's lead story, here's our own Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
Leading off our news this week, the amateur radio event of the year is just a few short days away. June 22nd through the 23rd, Amateur Radio Field Day. Here with all the details on this exciting annual event, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ, who files this special report.
Hundreds of thousands of hams around North America and beyond will participate in the beloved operating event. That would be Field Day. If you're still out looking for a place to go, use the Field Day Locator tool at www.arrl.org/field-day-locator. As clubs and individual operators make their last-minute checks on gear and cables, ARRL Contest Branch Manager Paul Bork, N1 SFE, wants to remind organizers to check on the human factors in a good operation. This is a good time to call everyone who said they wanted to come out and operate at Field Day and make sure that they still can come, he said. Bork noted that June is a busy time of the year for family obligations, and a reminder check-in could be helpful to both clubs and operators. You also want to make sure you have enough water and sunscreen around or have people to bring some. It could be very hot depending on where you are, and you got to take care of the most important aspect of the event, the people, he said. The June 2024 issue of QST Magazine has a special Field Day section, which includes a checklist of all of the ARRL and Radio Amateurs of Canada sections that count. Print that out and take it with you. Use it as a fun checklist, said Bork. There's always a debate as to the purpose of ARRL Field Day. It is part emergency communications exercise, part social gathering, part open house for ham radio. It is what the local club makes of it. No matter what your goal for activation is and what goal you have, ARRL hopes it is a safe, fun, and rewarding event for each club, said ARRL Radio Sport and Regulatory Manager Bart Janke, W9JJ. I'm John Ross, KD8I-DJ.
Find more information, the complete rules packet, and information on submitting logs at www.arrl.org/field-day.
A long-standing member service, the AMSAT Mail Alias Service, is scheduled to end on August 1st, 2024. A mail alias on AMSAT.org permitted people to send an email to members without knowing their actual internet email address. They just needed to know their amateur radio call sign. Unfortunately, the unchecked rise in domain name hacking and email account hijacking has made it impossible to sustain this service at a cost-effective level. The number of call sign at AMSAT.org email accounts that had been hijacked and converted to zombie spam accounts over the years had led many internet service providers and gateway centers to ban all at AMSAT.org email addresses, including those business accounts of AMSAT officers and officials. The tireless efforts of AMSAT's all-volunteer IT staff has worked for years to repair much of the damage, but AMSAT still gets complaints from members who are not getting their personal emails or AMSAT news because of persistent delivery problems. It has come to the point where the AMSAT volunteer IT staff can no longer keep up with the maintenance requirements to keep the alias mail list clean and to work with email gateways to remove blocks. And after considerable investigation into alternative paid email services, AMSAT leadership decided that the money required to keep an email alias system alive would be better spent on building and flying satellites for its members. Persons using the mail alias service should begin to migrate to different email accounts so they do not lose receipt of personal emails, AMSAT News Service weekly bulletins, AMSAT bulletin board posts, or official messages from AMSAT itself. Members are especially asked to make sure they are not using a call sign at AMSAT.org as their registered email address in the AMSAT membership portal. Members can easily change their registered member email address by logging into the portal and updating their profile.
Now celebrating our 25th year keeping the amateur radio community around the world informed, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available worldwide as a podcast from our web at twiar.net.
As an increasing number of satellites orbit the Earth, the $3 billion radio telescope being built in Western Australia's outback may need to find new ways to listen for faint radio signals. The number of satellites is expected to increase significantly in coming years, and for scientists who need the ground and the space above to be quiet, satellites and their booming loud radio interference are a significant challenge. When operational, the Square Kilometre Array radio telescope in Western Australia's Murchison region will detect and interpret faint radio signals from space via low frequencies and allow astronomers to see the birth of stars and galaxies. It's expected to be operational by 2030, when some experts are predicting up to 100,000 satellites will be orbiting. Dr. Chris Dupree is the Deputy Spectrum Manager for the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, which operates radio antennas across the U.S. He says the current situation is like trying to listen for whispers while satellites are yelling with bullhorns. Dr. Dupree said the observatory could no longer use some frequencies at its Greenbank facility in West Virginia, the largest steerable radio dish in the world, due to noise created by satellites. He said interference from the satellites was at the point where some scientists were scoping beyond Earth for the next ideal radio astronomy location, with the moon looming as an ideal location. It sounds a little crazy, but these are real discussions. That's definitely considered by the International Telecommunications Union to be an important possibility, Dr. Dupree said. The current location was selected because they are pristine, away from humans and cities, away from FM radio transmitters, TV transmitters, electronics, he said. If you're choosing that site today, you need to take into account that there's a level of interference from space that you can't escape. What's the point of putting up a telescope in a pristine location, which is remote, difficult to work at, and expensive, when you can't escape the interference anyway?
If there is any doubt that amateur radio can help in an emergency, 2 Utah families have a story that will help change your mind. John Ross, KD8IDJ, is here with the tale.
On June 5th, Isaac Stiles, KJ7FAY, and his 3-year-old son were involved in a boating accident. Their canoe had tipped over at the Lost Dog confluence to the Flaming Gorge Reservoir. The initial emergency call was made by Stiles' wife, Kendall. She had to drive to nearby campsites until she found someone with a phone that worked, and then she made the call to the Green River Fire Department. She indicated both her husband and son were in the water, but could not be seen or located. The fire department first responders were able to locate Stiles and his son on the opposite side of the river. They were rescued by a Sweetwater County Sheriff's Department boat. Stiles' son needed ambulance transportation to a waiting AirMed helicopter, which would then take him to Primary Children's Hospital in Salt Lake City, Utah. Stiles said that once his son was loaded into the ambulance to meet the helicopter, he needed to call his mother to take care of his other son, but there was no cell phone service. So he turned on his mobile ham radio to a local repeater and was able to make contact with Zach Gunyon, KE7WYG. Gunyon made telephone contact with Stiles' mother and relayed critical information. He also went a few steps further and stayed on the phone to help calm and assure Mrs. Stiles that everything was going well. He took the rest of the day off from work, kept monitoring the repeater until Stiles was back in the area, and then went to the scene of the accident to help recover the boat and clean up the equipment. After the emergency telephone conversations with Gunyon, Mrs. Stiles thanked him for his help, to which he replied, "This is why I originally got into ham radio, to help just one person in an emergency." Stiles had a hard time of finding the words to thank Gunyon. He's always been a dependable person and helped in many amateur events, said Stiles. We're fast becoming good friends. Gunyon said he keeps his radio on most of the time, except when he's moving between locations and servicing computer networks. "I lose signal as I move from building to building," said Gunyon, "but on the day of the accident, I just happened to be at the right place where I could hear the call for help." I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Stiles' son is now out of the hospital and on track to make a full recovery. Gunyon is an ARRL member and the current president of the Sweetwater Amateur Radio Club. He is an emergency management volunteer with the Sweetwater County Sheriff's Office. Stiles, secretary of the Sweetwater Club, is now working on a way to recognize Gunyon for his efforts during the accident.
The ARRL is not the only membership organization to have suffered an attack on its website recently. On May 30th, the Society of Broadcast Engineers had its website content and pages removed by malware, according to an earlier SB&E announcement. On June 5th, an updated article posted on RadioWorld.com said that the malware has since been removed and the SBE's website is back up and running. The SBE said it was able to restore its website content from a backup. The Society assured members that none of their data had been compromised, and they are now running scans to verify that any remnants from the attack have been eradicated. The SBE comprises 116 chapters and more than 4,500 members who work in the broadcast and multimedia technology fields.
In Germany, the arrival of June 24th will herald much anticipated changes for some amateurs. On that day, revisions to the Amateur Radio Ordinance take effect, granting simplified remote operating privileges to holders of a Class A license, the highest of the country's now 3 licenses. The ability to operate remotely has been a sought-after opportunity for many hams who want to stay active on the air, but are not permitted to install antennas at their residence or suffer from a significant amount of electromagnetic interference there. A project being undertaken by the DARC, Germany's national amateur radio organization, is bringing remote operation home, so to speak, by building a network of remote stations around the country that will be accessible to Class A hams in these situations. The development of the stations was funded from DARC plus membership funds. As reported recently by Radio DARC, 13 projects are going forward. Visitors to the Ham Radio Fair in Friedrichshafen later this month will be present as the first of those stations is unveiled.
As Ham Radio Friedrichshafen prepares to welcome visitors from June 28 until the 30th, Germany itself is preparing to welcome the first amateur radio operators to hold that country's new Class N license. Candidates who have been studying for the big day can sit the Class N license exam at Friedrichshafen, where the two of the earliest tests are being given on the 28th and 29th. A passing grade will give Germany's newest amateurs access to 70 centimeters, 2 meters, and 10 meters at a maximum power of 10 watts. The 47th edition of the International Radio Trade Fair, Europe's largest, takes its inspiration this year from the Islands on the Air Awards scheme, which was marking its 60th anniversary. The Youth Ham Camp and the Ham Rally are both returning, following their absence during the worldwide COVID pandemic. More than 300 commercial exhibitors and associations are expected to be on hand during the event.
Ham Radio 2024 International Amateur Radio Exhibition will be held June 28th through the 30th in Friedrichshafen, Germany on Lake Constance. This year's theme is 60 Years of Islands on the Air, Technology Meets Adventure. The 47th edition of this amateur radio exhibition will bring together amateur radio operators from all over the world. Ham Radio is Europe's largest trade fair for radio enthusiasts, with over 300 commercial exhibitors and associations showcasing their extensive range of products and training courses on various radio technology topics. New this year is the Innovation Hub of the International Amateur Radio Union and the extension to 2 career days. Returning this year is Ham Camp, where young radio enthusiasts and youth organizations spend the night in the exhibition hall, connecting with like-minded individuals of the same age who share their passion for radio. ARRL will be represented with a delegation this year, greeting members and friends from the global amateur radio community and networking with other national radio societies. Tickets for the event can be purchased at ticketshop-Messefrischen GmbH. That address online is messefrischen.de.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
Plans are shaping up for the 2024 Northeast Ham Exposition and New England Division Convention on August 22nd through the 25th, 2024 in Marlborough, Massachusetts. This year's convention will be held at the Best Western Royal Plaza Hotel and Trade Center, 181 Boston Post Road West, Marlborough, Massachusetts, 01752. This venue is located off of I-495 on Route 20 West. It offers many amenities and lots of nearby family-friendly attractions and dining options. The festivities kick off on Thursday evening, August 22nd, with entertainment provided by nationally known comedian Justin McKinney. Seating is limited to 250 people. Tickets are just $35 and also available as part of the Convention Plus package. Join your fellow hams for a delicious DXCC and contest banquet on Friday night with Yuri Onipko, VE3DZ, as he recaps his 50 years of DX and contesting activities and shares his operating experiences from a variety of locations around the world. Steve Goodgame, K5ATA, will present the keynote on Saturday morning. Steve leads ARRL's Education and Learning Department. He has a passion for youth outreach and works constantly to find ways to engage more youth in wireless technology and help teachers elevate their STEM programs. The Saturday evening grand banquet will feature special guest Dr. Tamitha Scove, WX6SWW. Known as Space Weather Woman in social media, Dr. Scove forecasts and analyzes space weather processes in the heliosphere and exosphere. Several new vendors will have their wares on display at the convention this year: Flex Radio, Elecraft, and Step IR Communications Systems. We'll also feature Halibut Electronics, Club Gear Online, Reliance Antennas, Remote Ham Radio, VE2DX Electronics, Gold Medal Ideas, AG Custom Gifts, and others. New for 2024 is Mini Contest University, based on K3LR's popular Contest University. CTU has been featured at the Dayton Hamvention since 2007 and has been presented in 15 countries to over 10,000 participants. Mini CTU is a series of contest-oriented talks and presentations offered at Ham Exposition all day Friday. Ham Exposition is pleased to offer a Parks on the Air track featuring presentations designed for both the newcomer and experienced POTA operators alike. There will be a functioning portable station operating on the hotel grounds designed to show beginners how to chase POTA contacts. In addition, an actual POTA activation will occur in a nearby state park following the prize drawing and closing ceremony. This year, volunteers will staff a special Get on the Air station, W1XPO, to mentor and assist newcomers in making their first HF contact. Our popular MCOM track will be back for 2024. Veteran emergency communicators will share their knowledge and experience to help others to up their game. In addition to talks and presentations, convention goers will get to see operational emergency communications vehicles on display in the parking lot. As always, the Northeast Ham Exposition will feature a robust flea market open to tailgaters on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. No major convention would be worth its salt without great prizes. Along with hourly drawings, we're pleased to announce that one lucky person will receive the grand prize, an ICOM IC705 QRP all-in-one transceiver. Second prize will be a Xiegu X6100 QRP HF 6-meter transceiver. The third prize will be an ICOM ID50A VHF UHF D-Star handheld. Tickets can be purchased in advance by visiting ticketing.hamexposition.org. That's ticketing.hamexposition.org.
Jim Springer, N5, JMZ, has become a silent key. He was an early developer of computer programs for scanners. He passed on June 7th, according to his obituary. He developed ScanCat and various versions of the program for scanner users. ScanCat was one of the earliest programs to interface personal computers and scanners to aid in their programming. According to an interview with the Shreveport Times in 2007, Jim Springer ran his business, Computer-Aided Technologies, from his home in the late 1980s. His obituary stated that the business was started in 1983. The ScanCat program was designed to work with many different programmable scanners, including Uniden, GRE, AOR, RadioShack, and Whistler, making it easier for hobbyists and others to program scanners without the need to use the front keypad on radios. In fact, not only radio hobbyists use ScanCat, but also law enforcement, the military, and government agencies, according to the article. Former National Communications Magazine publisher Norm Schreen partnered with Springer over the years in conjunction with his Mr. Scanner frequency database. Jim and I worked together integrating his ScanCat software with the Mr. Scanner database, Schreen told the magazine. At the time, it was sold with the Betty Bearcat database through Uniden and later with RadioShack. At RadioShack, it was incorporated to all store computers where the staff at the store could easily program a scanner for the customer. In addition, ScanCat with the Mr. Scanner database was sold in Sears and JCPenney catalogs as well as many locations online. ScanCat was not only sold in the United States, but also around the world. Sales of the program began in 1989, with RadioShack latching on in about 2003. At one point, almost 70% of ScanCat sales were the result of its affiliation with Radio Shack. ScanCat wasn't Springer's only entry into the software world. Copycat was a program for amateur radio operators, shortwave listeners, and also catered to military and professional clients. Springer also was the United States reseller of Hoka, a Dutch software suite used for HF and VHF radio signal analysis. In his interview with the Shreveport paper, Springer went on to say, "We're a vendor and sell that product to government people and agencies with 3 letters in Maryland." Springer was an engaged ham radio operator, sharing his knowledge with other radio amateurs. Springer's wife Felicia died in 2020 at the age of 78. He is survived by his 2 sons, 5 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren.
Do you have a mind-blowing idea you would like to share with the community? The International Amateur Radio Union Region 1 is inviting you to come with a game-changing idea which increases awareness of amateur radio. We are looking for your cool idea or project which you think is part of the future of amateur radio. So get together, make a team, share your idea, present your proposal, and bring this to reality. This is the time to present amateur radio with a different perspective, and IARU Region 1 is looking for you. The best proposals will be rewarded. Don't miss this opportunity. The challenges are as follows. Challenge number 1. Do you know that Guglielmo Marconi was the first radio amateur operator? He was born in 1874, and we are celebrating the 150th anniversary of his birth. Marconi made some of the most revolutionary inventions of the last centuries. They totally changed the speed of communication in a real global manner, and permitted a totally different way of living. Are you aware that radio amateurs are active in exploring the possibilities of radio waves following Marconi's footsteps? We would like to know how his inventions changed and are still changing your life. Share and explain it in a fun way in which you believe it will be attractive and known by more people. Here is a hint on this challenge. We are not looking for a long plain text, but for content to share on social media and reach a huge audience. Make use of reels, pictures, etc. No limits on creativity. Challenge number 2. Use your imagination. What will amateur radio look like in 10 years? Yes, we are talking about the future. Amateur radio is changing. In the past, we never heard about satellites, digimodes, or SDR. And these are just a few examples. We ask you to share a cool idea or project which you believe will be changing amateur radio, but is also fun to share. This could be in the direction of a technology project, experimentation, or digital development. Don't be limited. We ask you to share your ideas which are contributing to the amateur radio community. The Ham Challenge is a call for ideas. The best proposal will be rewarded and brought to life. Visit the IARU Region 1 website for all the details.
Proud to be among the very first podcasts on the Internet, you are listening to the weekly amateur radio news and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio.
Every 3 to 4 years, the International Telecommunications Union holds a World Radio Conference, commonly referred to as WRC, to manage the radio spectrum and review where new technologies fit in. The last WRC was in October and November last year, and the next one will be in 2027, hence WRC 27. The Department of Communication and Digital Technologies represents South Africa at these conferences, supported by experts from industry. To develop positions on the various agenda items, the department established the National Preparatory Working Group, at which experts from the department, industry, and academia develop the positions that are of the country's best interest and support the National Development Plan. On May 27th, the WRC 27 National Preparatory Working Group met in Pretoria. The South African Radio League was represented by Brian Jacobs, ZS6YZ, and Hans van de Gronendaal, ZS6AKV. On the World Radio Conference agenda, there are several items of interest to secure the future of amateur radio and developments not only in their ITU Region 2, but internationally.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX. I'm Bill, AJ8B. Here's what's happening in the world of DX. This section of DX News comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, just drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com. Starting off, we have Eurus YL2GM operating as VK9LA from Lord Howe Island, June 14th to the 24th. So Eurus should be QRV by the time you hear this. He will be on 160 through 10 meters using CW, sideband, and FT8. He prefers club log or QRS as his QSL route, but YL2GN can be the secondary QSL path for you. He will upload his logs to LO2W 6 months after he completes the trip. We have the British Virgin Islands being activated by W5GI. Jonathan will be back on Anaga June 14th to the 28th, possibly until July 6th. So again, should be QRV by the time you hear this. As he's done before, he will be on 20 and 10 meter sideband with a little 40. It's a relaxing vacation, but he expects to get on the airwaves at least an hour a day, and he will try to get on from the new POTA VG-0021. Jonathan's a really good operator, and if you hear him, try to get him in the log. So this is a little bit further down the calendar, if you will, but it is less than a year away, April 2025. 19 operators will activate the Galapagos Islands, IOTA SA-004, April 18th to the 27th of 2025. This DXpedition is being supported by the Aracura DX Club, the Guaira DX Club, Mediterráneo DX Club, and the Liga de Amateurs Brasileiros do Radio Amacio Club. You can QSL via M0URX. Stay tuned here for more information. Testing for the Jarvis DXpedition, which is slated for August 2024, so just over a month and a half, quote, will be challenged by both the season, mainly on the low bands, and the Forest Wildlife Service antenna restrictions. Ahead of Jarvis, we want to do as much testing as possible. We have new antennas and an expanded remote operator network. Both need testing. This will also give DXers an opportunity to test their stations and perhaps put a new one in the log. So from June 25th to July 2nd, they will operate Wallace and Fortuna, FW7JV. They will also be testing of the low-band antennas on 160, 80, and 40, as well as some testing of the new 40 and 20 meter antennas. Then July 10th to July 25th, American Samoa K8R. At that point, they'll be testing all systems and all bands, CQ, sideband, FT8, and they will also be in the IARU contest. During both test periods, actual signal reports will be appreciated. Good luck in 73s from George, AA7JV, end quote. Now, that's going to be a lot of fun because they'll hit Jarvis after they've done all this testing, and I'll bet it just goes really well. We have some sad news in the amateur radio world. W8R, Jerry Becker, passed away June 7th after a long battle with cancer. He was first licensed as KA8ZOK. He operated on all bands, but particularly like 6 meters, with almost 150 DXCC entities worked on 6. W9VNE, Jim, says Jerry was, quote, the go-to repair guy in Southwest Ohio for ham gear. He could fix anything when no one else could, end quote. He was close to 70 years old, says Jim. Joe, W8GEX, adds that they had gone on DXpeditions together and Jerry was the smartest technician he has ever met. And I can attest to that, as he repaired my Ameritron AL80B amplifier in very little time and just did a heck of a job with it. So he will be missed. November 2 November Charlie is introduced as the new director of CQ Worldwide VHF contest, and this is a press release. The Worldwide Radio Operator Foundation, WWROF, is pleased to announce that, effective immediately, John Golem, N2NC, will be assuming the director role for the CQ Worldwide VHF contest. A ham since 1980, Golem has been an active contester throughout, being widely respected for both his technical contributions and his operating skills. Over the years, John has produced an impressive list of world-class contest results, participating at a high level in both HF and VHF-UHF competitions. In particular, Gollum has participated in the CQ Worldwide VHF contest for 7 straight years, amassing nearly 2,500 QSOs along the way. John's VHF experience includes building stations for his own use as well as via several technical partnership with operational capabilities ranging from 6 meters to 23 centimeters and beyond. Professionally, John recently retired from a career with the U.S. Naval Air Systems Command, where he led a team responsible for the power systems of electromagnetic aircraft launch equipment. Quote, John possesses a unique combination of technical and operating skills at the highest level of radio sport. He has also demonstrated tremendous leadership capabilities that, in total, make him the perfect leader for the CQ Worldwide VHF contest, said WWROF Chairman Tim Duffy, K3LR. Quote, I look forward to leading this world-class event into the future alongside WWROF, and I'm honored to be asked to be the contest director, noted Gollum. My sincere thanks to John, K9JK, for his past service to the CQ Worldwide VHF contest and its participants, end quote. Well, I didn't know too much about the WWROF, so I thought I'd look it up for a second, and here's their declaration statement. The Worldwide Radio Operators Foundation is a nonprofit, donor-supported organization dedicated to improving the skills of amateur radio operators around the world, utilizing education, competition, advancement of technology, and scientific research, promoting international friendship and goodwill, and preparing them to better serve society in times of communications need. In addition, WWROF provides major assistance, including the infrastructure for log submissions, log checking, reporting, and other support services for many popular radio contests. For more information, you can check out www.rof.org. And finally, the latest edition of the DX Mentor, number 41, has been posted and is now available wherever you get your podcasts. The discussion this week is with KJ9I, David, and 6-meter EME. And did you think it was possible, using a dipole, to work New Zealand with 1 watt on 6 meters? It happened, and the details are located in that podcast, so you might want to give that a listen, the DX Mentor podcast. Until next week, this is Bill, AJB saying 7-3, and I hope to see you in the pile-ups.
Are you ready for another excursion into amateur radio history? This is Bill Continelli, W2XOY, and I'll be back in a moment with another installment of the Ancient Amateur Archives.
Hams need to send email using only radio frequencies understand the power of WinLink, especially when the messages they send and receive contain vital information during an earthquake, hurricane, or some other emergency. Now WinLink is showing its more playful side. It's fun with a purpose. If you're a fan of Wordle, the web-based guessing game involving 5-letter words, you're in luck. In fact, if you're an amateur radio operator who also is a fan of WinLink, you're in even more luck. Meet Hamword, a game that allows amateurs to keep their WinLink skills sharp while engaging in a Wordle-style game. Now in its 2nd year, Hamword has also won fans in at least 22 countries, and more than 5,700 individual games have been played. Since it's only a game, you don't even have to be near your rig to play. You can use the Telnet interface over the web to send a 5-letter word to the WinLink tactical call sign, Hamword. That's Hamword, all one word. You still need a ham license and a functioning WinLink account, though. Mark said that he has great hopes more hams will get in the game, which had the simple purpose at the outset of helping people with their WinLink proficiency. His feelings about the support that Hamword has gained can be best described by a 5-letter word, GREAT. To learn more, visit the link you can find at hambooks.org.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
And now, with this week's edition of the Ancient Amateur Archives, here's Bill Continelli, W2XOY.
In 1932, at the height of the Great Depression, Bill Halligan, W9AC, age 33, formed a new company. He called his new business the Helicrafters. The name was chosen as a composite of the two words Halligan and handcrafted. Bill adopted the creed, "Handcraft makes perfect," and it was used in the first logo of the new enterprise in late 1932. A few radio sets were built, the S1 through the S3, at an old manufacturing plant at 417 North State Street in Chicago. Immediately, the young Hallicrafters Company was beset with problems. Most of the hams these new radios were designed for hadn't yet recovered from the Great Depression and did not have the money to buy the radios. As if this wasn't enough, RCA came down hard on Hallicrafters for patent infringements, insisting that no more radios could be built until they granted Hallicrafters a license, which they had no intention of doing. Bill didn't give up. Procuring as many orders for his radios as possible, he contracted with a licensed manufacturer to build them in small production runs of 50 or 100 sets. He had to use these orders themselves for collateral, an arrangement that at best was very limiting. What Hallicrafters needed was a license to build under the RCA patents. In 1933, Silver Marshall Incorporated went into bankruptcy, and Bill saw an opportunity to get his coveted license. A deal was engineered. Bill and Hallicrafters took over Silver Marshall Incorporated, renaming it the Silver Marshall Manufacturing Company, and operating it from the State Street address. This relationship was also plagued with financial problems and ended in late 1934. Bill was released from his obligations to Silver Marshall with the help of the Echophone Radio Company. Echophone was also in financial trouble. For all practical purposes, it was out of business. But they had a 50,000 square foot plant and a good RCA license. Bill struck a deal with the owner of Echophone, and the two companies merged, with Hallicrafters being the dominant partner. During the first few months, the company did contract work for other radio manufacturers and large mail-order houses in order to build its cash reserves. In late 1935, they started producing their own line of communication receivers, which we are all familiar with. The SX9 Super Skywriter was the first model to be produced in significant quantities. Hallicrafters' policy was to build a quality product with all the state-of-the-art advances and features at a price that was affordable. With this policy and good management, they pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. By 1938, Hallicrafters was the most popular manufacturer of communications receivers in the U.S. and was doing business in 89 other countries. Bill decided on another policy, that as new features and technical advances were made, Hallicrafters would bring out new models rather than just upgrade the same basic model. This explains the proliferation of different models, which in a 3-year period from 1936 through 1938 had reached 23. Until 1938, the production was limited to receivers and associated accessories. Now it was time to produce transmitters. The onslaught of World War II took the U.S. by surprise. There was a shortage of military radio equipment and tremendous government demand for electronic equipment of all types. Many of the existing Hallicrafters products and designs were pressed into military service. The company geared up for wartime production and was responsible for many new designs and innovations. Probably the best known of these were the HT4, the BC610, and the SCR299. Production of ham radio gear and related items was all but suspended until 1945. By August of 1945, the war was over, and so were wartime production and most government contracts. It was time again to produce ham radio equipment. A new line of consumer electronics was needed to satisfy a public hungry for products they had gone without for over 5 years. The old plant had served Hallicrafters well during the war years, but the company needed a modern image for their facility and product line in the post-war period. A new plant was designed and built at 4401 West 5th Avenue in Chicago. This would be the company's home for the next 20 years. The products were given a modern look, with the help of Raymond Loewy, a well-known industrial designer of the time. One of the first post-war sets produced in the new facility was the SX-38. The logo was again changed, this time to the familiar Circle H. Production also began on the new line of consumer electronics, including radio phonograph units of all shapes and sizes, AM/FM receivers, clock radios in brightly colored Bakelite cases, and television receivers, the first of which was the T-54. Many of the consumer products bore the name Echophone, which had all been but forgotten by this time. Competition was stiff in the consumer electronics field, and this Hallicrafters line never really took hold, although it stayed in production until the late 1950s. Even so, the company was doing better than ever, employing 2,500 people by 1952. The 1950s were very successful for the company. The United States' focus during the 50s was civil defense, so many Hallicrafters products from this period bore the names like Civic Patrol and Defender. Some of the ham radio products became classics, like the HT-32 and the SX-101. Much of this equipment is still in use today and is sought after by nostalgia buffs and collectors. By 1958, Bill Sr. wanted to retire, and the company was sold. Little is known about this transaction, but apparently it failed, and the Halligans returned to resume control of the corporation a short time later. In 1963, Hallicrafters purchased Radio Industries Incorporated of Kansas City, running it as a subsidiary. Radio Industries produced many of the ham radio accessories and some major equipment like the HT-45. Also during this period, Hallicrafters was the corporate sponsor of REACT, which was formed in 1962. The Halligans continued operations until about 1966, when the company was sold to the Northrop Corporation. This ended forever the Halligans' involvement in Hallicrafters. Northrop moved the company to a new plant in Rolling Meadows, Illinois, and modified the logo again. While a subsidiary of Northrop, Hallicrafters produced ham radio products for a few more years, but the main function was producing paramilitary equipment in Northrop's Defense Systems Division, much of it in El Paso, Texas. For all practical purposes, the last ham radio item produced was the FPM 300 in 1972, and a few accessories through 1974. There were also some CB units and portable AM/FM shortwave sets of Japanese origin released under the Hallicrafters name. At this point, Northrop turned Hallicrafters over to its partner, Wilcox. The annual sales of Hallicrafters have been falling off sharply since 1970. On December 4th, 1975, Wilcox sold the company to the Breaker Corporation of Dallas, Texas. Breaker packed up 14 semi-trailer loads of Hallicrafters records and parts and moved the company to Grand Prairie, Texas. They set up shop there with several former Hallicrafters employees of the late 60s and 70s who relocated to Texas. A few more CBs and various portable radios of Japanese and Taiwanese origin were released, but Breaker began to suffer severe financial difficulties. Around 1979, Breaker ceased doing business, and Hallicrafters along with it. On August 24, 1979, Clarence E. Long engineered a purchase of the name, logos, and what was left of the company. A new corporation called Hallicrafters International was set up in Miami. It also had international trademarks. Long set up shop and hired a large staff in anticipation of receiving large government contracts to build paramilitary radios for the armed forces. The new Hallicrafters International had to prove to the government that it could handle the contracts as well as the old firm had. Something went wrong, however. Long's plans failed to be approved, and Hallicrafters lost the contracts. In the early 1980s, Long set up a plant somewhere in the New England states and also had convinced several well-known people in other parts of the company to join in the new venture. Despite all this activity, Long was in serious financial and legal trouble. He declared bankruptcy on June 1, 1988 in San Antonio, Texas. All of his property, including the Hallicrafters name, logos, and whatever records were saved were made property of a court-appointed trustee. Since this time, the Helicrafter's name has not been used, and for all practical purposes is non-existent, except in the memory of ham radio operators. In our next installment, we will continue looking at fallen flags in the amateur radio field. This is Bill Continelli, W2XOY, for This Week in Amateur Radio.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. If you've heard the phrase shortwave listeners, you might have wondered what on earth that was all about. It relates to the length of a radio wave used to transmit information. The length of a radio wave is tied to its frequency. The longer the wave, the lower the frequency. When radio amateurs talk about bands, like for example the 40-meter band, we're talking about a range of frequencies where the wavelength is around 40 meters. From a frequency perspective, this is around 7 MHz. The 160-meter band at about 1.8 MHz or 1800 kHz is considered the beginning of the shortwave bands. This implies that there are longer waves as well. If you've ever seen or owned a mid-1980s transistor radio, you'll have seen the notation MW, which stands for medium wave. Today it's called the AM band. Older radios might have the notation LW, or long wave. The medium wave band is a broadcast radio band that runs between about 500 and 1700 kHz. The wavelength is between 600 meters and 170 meters. When radio was still in its infancy, there was also a popular long wave band, with wavelengths between 800 meters and 2000 meters, or 150 to 375 kHz. Today, much of that has gone by the wayside. With the advent of digital radio, in Australia it's called DAB+, digital audio broadcasting, the whole idea of wave has pretty much vanished. Some countries, like Japan and the United States, are in the process of discussing the phasing out of the AM broadcast band. Much of that appears to be driven by car manufacturers who claim that the AM band is no longer useful or used, but forget to tell anyone that they really want to stop having to put AM radios in their cars because it's difficult to isolate the electrical noise from their modern contraptions in order to make it possible to actually listen to that band. If you ask me, it's a good incentive to make electronics RF quiet, something which is increasingly important in our wirelessly connected world. This might lead you to believe that all activity on air is moving to higher and higher frequencies, but that's not the case. The properties that made long-wave and medium-wave radio possible in the early 1900s are still valid today. For example, there are whisper or weak signal propagation reporter beacons on the 2200-meter band, or at 136 kHz. Whilst your RTL SDR dongle might not quite get down that low, most of them start at 500 kHz, you don't need to spend big to start playing. My Yaesu FT857D is capable of tuning to 100 kHz, plenty of space to start listening to the 2200-meter band, even if I cannot physically or legally transmit there. If you want to build your own receiver, you can check out the weaksignals.com website by Alberto, Italy to Papa Hotel Delta, where you'll find a project to build a receiver capable of 8 kHz to 900 kHz using a $50 circuit board. If that's not enough, there's radio experimentation happening at even lower frequencies. Dedicated to listening to anything below 22 kHz, including natural RF, with a wavelength greater than 13 kilometers, Renato, Italy Kilo 1 Quebec Foxtrot Kilo, runs the website vlf.it, where you'll find receivers and antennas to build. Given that most sound cards operate up to around 192 kHz, you can start by connecting an antenna to the microphone port of your sound card and use it to receive VLF or very low frequencies. On your Linux computer, you can use Quisk to tune. There are VLF transmitters on air. For example, SAQ, the Kilometre radio station in Sweden, opened on the 1st of December 1924. Capable of 200 kilowatts, today it uses about 80 kilowatts and transmits twice a year on 17.2 kilohertz. While we search for higher and higher frequencies, there is still plenty of fun to be had at the other end of the radio spectrum. Consider, for example, that the VLF or very low frequency radio waves between 3 and 30 kilohertz can penetrate seawater. I'll leave you to explore. I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima Alpha Bravo.
The new Amateur Extra Class Question Pool has been released and will be effective beginning July 1, 2024 through June 30 of 2028. The 2024 through 2028 pool is available as a Microsoft Word document and as a PDF. The 10 graphics required for the new Extra Class Question Pool are available within the documents or separately in PDF and JPEG formats. ARRL Volunteer Examiner Coordinator Manager Maria Soma, AB1FM, and member of the National Conference of Volunteer Examiner Coordinator Question Pool Committee, said the pool includes significant changes compared to the 2020 through 24 version. We carefully went over the pool for technical accuracy, relevance to today's amateur radio practices, syntax, grammar style, format, and clarity and redundancy between the pools. With these goals in mind, 82 new questions were created and 101 questions eliminated, resulting in a reduction of the number of questions from 622 to 603. Over 350 questions were modified. We considered a question modified when the knowledge being tested was not changed, but wording was improved, or answers or distractors were replaced. Some advise that the newly revised pool must be used for amateur extra class licensing exam starting July 1 of 2024. New test designs will be available to ARRL volunteer examiners on that date. The ARRL VEC will supply its officially appointed field stocked VE teams with new extra class exam booklet designs around the middle of June.
Founded in Australia, the Pride Radio Group has become an LGBTQ+ virtual radio club whose members around the globe enjoy shared values. Their latest event is called CQ Pride, a special event being held in connection with Pride Month. The on-air activity celebrates inclusion and diversity in amateur radio. Listen for the call signs N6L, N6G, N6B, and N6T operating on all bands and all modes. Operators have been on the air since June 6th and will continue through to June 17th at 0100 UTC. Hams who collect QSL cards from all 4 stations will be able to make a poster out of them. The popular event was first launched by Pride Radio Group in 2022.
OpenSource.radio is a new wiki started by DK1MI, which aims to highlight all things open source and amateur radio. From hardware to software, this project is designed to provide hams with a free source of information to help further our exploration into the ham radio hobby. The OpenSource.radio wiki can be viewed by typing in OpenSource.radio in your browser. DK1MI is looking for additional contributors and has provided a how-to document for those interested. OpenSource.radio is a public wiki that lists and describes available open source projects in more detail, as well as providing ready-made recipes for setting up a free amateur radio station. It should serve as a first port of call to find out what alternatives there are to commercial products, or simply to get inspiration for new projects.
Serving the amateur radio community for a quarter century, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, heard around the world on the amateur bands and streaming on the Internet.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. Jerry, N0JY, AMSAT Vice President of Engineering, gave some updates on current and future projects. AMSAT is working towards 10 GHz X-band for downlinks and 5 GHz C-band for uplinks. This is commonly referred to as 5 and dime. We are looking to also add 2.4 GHz S-band for uplink, as that is what is used on QO100 over Europe. An Attitude Detection and Control System, or ADEX, is going to be necessary to reach any higher orbits where you need to mitigate possible collisions and be able to deorbit or raise and lower your orbit as necessary to extend the mission of the satellite. AMSAT has chosen CubeSpace ADEX for their module. More of the components are going to have to be radiation hardened to last. Gulf T is looking like a possible launch in early 2026, with Gulf 1 around a year later. The smaller antennas required for 5 GHz and 10 GHz will make portable operations easier. It will also mean smaller antennas at home that do not take up a lot of space. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time for the weekly propagation forecast report, a close-up look at space weather. A weak halo coronal mass ejection may impact Earth either on late UTC Day, June 15th, or else early UTC Day, June 16th. Solar activity was lower over the past reporting week, June 6th through the 12th. 10 new sunspot groups emerged, 2 on June 6th, 1 on June 7th, 2 on June 9th, and 5 on June 12th. The average daily sunspot number dropped from 183.4 to 139.4, and average daily solar flux dropped from 184.8 to 179.2. The average daily planetary A index went from 8 to 11.6, and middle latitude numbers went from 9.4 to 11.1. The most active day geomagnetically was June 7th, when the planetary A index was 28. Alaska's College A index was 38. This was an unexpected G2+ geomagnetic storm that commenced at 11:30 UTC. Spaceweather.com reports a polar cap absorption event on June 12th and 13th. Protons from the sun are raining down on Earth, and it is causing shortwave blackouts. So looking at the solar flux for the near term shows a peak at 205 on June 26th through the 29th, and again on July 23rd though the 26th. The forecast for the near term shows flux at 175 on June 15th through the 17th, then 180 on June 18th through the 20th, then 185, 190 and 195 on June 21st through the 23rd. 200 on June 24th and 25th, then 205 on June 26th through the 29th. The predicted planetary A index for the near term will be 12 and 15 on June 15th and 16th, then 8 on June 17th and 18th, then 5 on June 19th through the 21st, 8 on June 22nd and 23rd, then hold steady at 5 on June 24th through the 29th.
In Radio Sport this week, more great contests. The Pajay Garan Bogor DX contest, that's phone, that's held on June 15th. June 15th to the 16th, it's the All Asian DX contest, CW. Also on the 15th through the 16th of June, the SMIRK contest, CW and phone. The IARU Region 1 50 MHz contest, that's CW. June 15th to the 16th, the LZ International 6-meter contest, CW and phone. And also June 15th to the 16th, the Stu Perry Top Band Challenge, CW phone. And the West Virginia QSO Party, that's CW phone and digital. And on June 15th, it's the ARRL Kids Day, that is phone. And on June 16th, it's the Feldhill Sprint, that is digital. Upcoming section, state, and division conventions. On June 15th, it's the ARRL Maine State Convention and Hamfest in Augusta, Maine. June 15th as well, the Knoxville Hamfest and Electronics Convention sponsoring the ARRL Delta Division Convention, that's in Knoxville, Tennessee. July 12th to 13th, HamCon Zion sponsoring the ARRL Rocky Mountain Division Convention in St. George, Utah. July 13th, the SVARC Summer Hamfest, sponsoring the ARRL North Dakota Section Convention in Minot, North Dakota. And on July 20th, the SEARC Tailgate Hamfest, sponsoring the ARRL South Dakota State Convention, that's in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And remember, you can search the ARRL Hamfest and Convention database to find events in your area. The official Flag Day 2024 is held on June 14th this year, but to commemorate Flag Day, on June 17th, the Warminster Amateur Radio Club, WARC, will operate special event station W3U from the League House of the Union League of Philadelphia. The station will be on the air from 1300 Zulu to 2000 Zulu on 14.320 and 7.220 megahertz, and a QSO certificate will be available to those who contact WARC. The Union League of Philadelphia is a patriotic society founded in 1862. The League House, built in 1865, is considered to be one of the most beautiful structures in Philadelphia and was added to the National Historical Register in 1979.
It is time for the weekly AMSAT satellite shorts from all over, and this week we begin with Warsaw University. Technology students plan to launch their third satellite in 2025. The launch was originally scheduled for this year, but was delayed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Members of the Student Space Association of the university's Faculty of Power and Aeronautical Engineering successfully put the first Polish satellite, PWSat, into orbit in 2012. This feat was followed in 2018 by the launch of PWSat-2. Next, working around multiple helium leaks and thruster problems, the crew of Boeing's Starliner spacecraft wrapped up a challenging rendezvous and a delayed but successful docking with the International Space Station this past Thursday in a major milestone for the new ship's first piloted test flight. And finally this week, Virgin Galactic announced the completion of its second spaceflight of 2024 and 12th mission to date, carrying one researcher and 3 private astronauts. The Galactic 07 flight marks the company's 7th research mission, with Virgin Galactic spaceship again serving as a suborbital lab for space-based scientific research.
June's arrival means it's time to shine a little light on those beloved beacons of maritime safety, the lighthouses and lightships from around the world. The weekend event coming up in August is not a contest, but you might say there's a little bit of friendly competition going on right now among operators in various countries to see who can register as many of those historic structures as fast as they can. Lighthouses and lightships have typically transmitted reliable light beams to guide ships home from their journeys over the years. On August 17th and 18th, hams will be at many of those same sites, transmitting signals from Australia, Argentina, Germany, the United Kingdom, Belgium, South Africa, and the United States, and any other country that takes pride in the history that makes each of them so special. Some stations will be QRP, others may operate QRO. Some stations will be operated solo and others by teams. There are no restrictions, just some guidelines. Registration is not mandatory, but organizers strongly encourage it. Visit the website illw.net for details.
You're listening to America's premier amateur radio news magazine of the air. This Week in Amateur Radio.
Teachers are gathered from around the United States to learn about amateur radio and how to use it in their classrooms as part of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education. John Ross, KD8 IDJ, is here with all the details.
The 2024 cohorts of the ARRL Teachers Institute, TI, on wireless technology have begun. The first group of members for the year are returning teachers participating in the second round of learning, known as TI2. TI1 was amazing, immersive experience that broadened my knowledge of wireless technology, electronics, and amateur radio. I implemented ideas and applications from the very first day of the workshop within the first week of my return to school, said Everton Henriquez, KD2ZZT, a teacher from Staten Island, New York. Attending TI2 would further invigorate my teaching practice and allow us to do more cool projects, he continued. TI2 takes things a step further from basic radio principles. It builds on what they learned in the previous year and really exposes these teachers to advanced remote sensing technology, said ARR Education and Learning Manager Steve Goodgame, K5ATA. TI also includes a demonstration of telemetry data gathering from amateur satellites, basic amateur satellite operation, and a discussion of applications of the satellite data to math and science topics. TI2 participants will also learn how to do Arduino programming and remote sensing. The ARRL Teachers Institute is easily one of the best classes I've ever taken. The hands-on projects were phenomenal, and everything I learned in TI1 was useful with my club and in the classroom. TI2 is raising the bar, and I already have a ton of things I will do next year based on this course. I am deeply grateful to the ARRL for this opportunity. All that said by Dr. Chris Brown, W9SBS of the Alabama School of Cyber Technology and Engineering. I'm John Ross, KD8I-DJ.
The ARRL Teachers Institute on Wireless Technology is funded entirely by donors through the ARRL Education and Technology Program. Learn more at www.arrl.org/TI. There are 7 TI cohorts this summer. It costs teachers a $100 application fee to attend. All travel, lodging, and other costs are covered by the generous donors to the program.
The Russian Flora and Fauna Organization has severed ties with Worldwide Flora and Fauna and will no longer participate in its awards program. The coordinator of the Russian Flora and Fauna Awards program has announced on the RFF website that it is withdrawing from the Worldwide Flora and Fauna activities effective immediately. Vitaly Kuzmenko, RN3ANT, wrote that the decision was made with regret because of recent actions by the Worldwide Flora and Fauna Committee, including the elimination in April of Crimean Park references. Vitaly said in the June 7th posting that the awards applications that have already been approved will be completed, but new RFF-H applications through Worldwide Flora and Fauna will not. He said that Russia's own Flora and Fauna program will continue to operate and issue awards.
The Jackson Amateur Radio Club has already shown its Mississippi community the power of amateur radio thanks to a newly formed partnership with a public library system in suburban Madison County. Now the library has a pair of 3D printers, gifts to the library from the hams to encourage library patrons to engage in maker activities that might be useful to amateur radio or other electronics-related activities. Frank Howell, K4FMH, described the gift in a recent blog post, explaining that the printers, which have a combined retail value of $3,000, will be free for the patrons to use provided they cover the cost of the resin used to print any files. A June 7th press release from the club, Frank, assistant director of ARRL's Delta Division, praised the club as a national leader in creating this kind of relationship with public libraries, calling libraries the most common cultural crossroad in the United States. Earlier this year, the club hosted the first of what will be quarterly events for the library system, introducing patrons to the process by which they can get their ham radio license. The library system has also committed to having at least one staff member at each branch get their license too, and to have a basic Radio Shack on the premises.
There's amateur radio, there's astronomy, and there's amateur radio astronomy. All of that is about to come together under one roof in upstate New York. The Chautauqua Amateur Radio Service has quite a few things in common with the Martz Cole Observatory in Frewsburg, New York, a nonprofit facility focusing on citizen science, science education, and outreach. What they have in common are their names on their respective membership rosters. In fact, so many club members belong to the observatory that the next step was a natural progression of their relationship. Club treasurer Bob Swanson, KD2, PZV, that's Kilo Delta 2, Papa Zulu Victor, told the Post-Journal that hams had been looking for a permanent home and the observatory seemed to be just the right spot. He told the website, radio astronomy has become a big deal and there's a lot in common with what radio services do and astronomy. He said the observatory has a busy calendar of events that incorporates ham radio participation. In fact, the next event most certainly will be all about amateur radio. It's ARRL Field Day on June 22nd and 23rd, when the Chautauqua amateurs will be calling CQ Field Day on the observatory property, not far from the county's highest point. Bob expressed hope that the observatory and the hams can craft an agreement that also makes them partners in science education initiatives there, that will help visitors keep an eye on the stars and the planets as well as the radio waves everywhere.
Hams in India gathered on June 5th on what would have been the 70th birthday of Ronald Sequeira, VU2RLS, to celebrate his life as a respected, widely known author whose passions also extended into amateur radio, where he showed great skill and a generous heart. Ronald belonged to the Mangalore Amateur Radio Club and was a life member of the Amateur Radio Society of India. Ronald was president of the Konkari Writers and Artists Association and was widely known in India's literary circles for his essays and other writings. He died on May 6th after a long illness. His longtime friend, Sri Bhatt, VU2SBJ, said that Ronald always brought a personal touch to the many local VHF nets he conducted, and he used his writing skills to craft the right words for the moment. Sri went on to say that unfortunately we have lost his lively presence and are left with only fond memories. Meanwhile, amateurs in Hyderabad and Vijayawada are grieving for a young promising radio amateur who died on June 8th after succumbing to injuries from an earlier automobile accident. According to news reports, 27-year-old Pavan Kumar, VU3 LFZ, was well known as an active amateur in Andhra Pradesh and was also an accomplished photographer. He received serious head injuries from the accident 3 weeks earlier and had been in a coma. Pavan was active in the amateur community and had served as a delegate last November at Hamfest India in Ahmedabad.
This Week in Amateur Radio is holding open auditions for news anchors for the weekly national worldwide amateur radio news service. If you have a good radio voice and can reliably read provided news copy, we are looking for you. This, of course, is an all-volunteer position. An amateur radio license is not required. You must have a high-quality microphone, headset mics are not used, and be familiar with audio editing software to record and edit your finished news stories before uploading. If you would like to try out for a weekly or bi-weekly anchor position with North America's premier amateur radio news on air and podcast, please send an email to our producer, George, W2XBS. You can include a sample MP3 of yourself reading news copy sent as an attachment to W2XBS77@gmail.com. That's whiskey, the number 2, X-ray Bravo Sierra 77@gmail.com. Be sure and use Anchor Audition in the subject line. Please include your phone number and a good window of time for a callback to discuss your submission and our operating logistics to see if This Week in Amateur Radio is a good fit for you. We hope to hear from you soon.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
And finally this week, Cyclone Ramal devastated homes and destroyed lives as it swept through parts of India and Bangladesh in May. But no one expected the deadly storm to help one family find wholeness amid the wreckage. Believed to be dead after he had gone missing 4 years ago, a fish merchant from Bangladesh was reunited with his family, even as Cyclone Ramal was poised to destroy thousands of other lives. While evacuating a district in West Bengal to shelters to prepare for the coming storm, a civil defense worker, Anup Sesmal, noticed a man who was sitting alone at an embankment, talking quietly to himself incoherently. According to media reports, authorities recognized that the man was a Bangladeshi who had somehow become displaced. They contacted the West Bengal Radio Club, which has expertise in assisting in missing person cases. The club had already sent many of its members to Sagar Island to assist with emergency communications during the cyclone, but the hams remaining reached out to amateur radio operators in Bangladesh. Radio operators there were able to locate the man's village and ultimately his family by providing a physical description and other details. The man and his family were immediately reunited via an emotional video call, and arrangements were made to have him return home after the storm. It is not known how or how long ago the Bangladeshi national ended up across the border from his home country or what happened to him in the years in between.
This Week in Amateur Radio is heard on nets and repeater systems all around the U.S. and around the world on great operations like WA0RCR from the center of the U.S., Wentzville, Missouri, where This Week in Amateur Radio is proud to be part of the legendary Gateway 160-meter net report each weekend. Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia, and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you'd like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and our news team around the world, this is Chris Perrine, KB2FAF, wishing you a 73.